There we go. We are now recording. My name is Morgan Dunton. I'm the ELA specialist at the Department of Education. I know that you all know that because you got the password from me. I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit distracted for a minute as I try to make sure I'm letting folks in as they're knocking on the door. So as you know, we've been hit with Zoom trolls, and we're trying very hard to not let them in again. They are quite a nuisance. So I think we've got it. I think that everyone who's here belongs here. But it just takes a little bit of extra work to get in here. Now the password that you got for today's meeting is the password for every Tuesday, and you should have also gotten the password for Thursday meetings. There's two different links, but the password should work each time. There we go. And we just double check, sorry. Okay. So the process is this. I know, I'm sorry if you've been with me all along, but I'm going to repeat this for the folks who are first timers. Oops, there we go. Okay. So we're going to stay on mute while the presentation is taking place, and then we'll open it up for conversation. And what you'll do is raise your hand, and you'll see if you click on participants, a box opens up, and in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a box that says raise hand. So if you haven't found it yet, please look for that now. And what happens is I will call on you, you will unmute yourself and join the conversation in that way. Sorry, I'm now, of course, you know, the most inconvenient things happen at precisely the wrong moment. Okay. Let me see, feel free to use the chat box anytime. I will do my best to keep up with that as I'm doing this presentation. Now the format for the PD is I have prepared a formal presentation. We'll walk through that and then we'll have discussion. On Thursday, if you come back and join me, that's just, it's office hours, it's an open conversation. Today is recorded, I'll tell you how to get to the recording. Thursday's not. The office hours are just for us to chat and meet. Okay, are there any questions? Anything that anybody wants to clarify before we get rolling? I just want to comment, we are what we teach, and you know who I'm talking to. We do take on the characteristics of our students, I think, and it's okay. All right, so I am going to, here we go, let me get back to that. I am going to share my slides. Let's see if I can do this correctly. All right, so you should be looking at a slide that says clarity and feedback, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Really focusing on what we do with feedback. So the first thing I want to do is just review what I think we can do in the next half hour or so. There we go, I have to get my screen cleared up here. So we're going to talk a little bit about teacher clarity. There's an article, if you've been with me, I've told you several times, you got to read this article. We're going to refer to that just a little bit. We're also going to review quickly objectives for Learning 4. We've been talking about why it's important to know your big objectives for this fourth quarter of learning. A little quick review of text-dependent questions. Not really a substantive content review, but more of a quick topical review. And then we'll get into this idea of planning for the virtual environment. We need to make sure we're certain about our ability to engage with our students. We have to honor our own capacity. Definitely, this is a different environment, and not only us, our students have limited capacities too. We've got to figure out where the boundaries of this capacity lie. We need to make sure that we understand the purpose of what it is we're doing. Even though I think we're getting different messages, it's okay. And we're going to look at the scope of the work that we are doing, that we're asked to do, and that we can do. So that's a lot for about a half an hour, but I think we can do it. So the first thing I want to do is go back to this article. It was written by Patty Forrester. I posted it in the documents before. It was about teacher clarity. It's called Focus, Purpose, and Letting Go. So the first thing that I'd like us to talk about is purpose. Now let's think about how our purpose has changed. I'd like you, if you would, use the chat box and think about how has our purpose changed? What are we being asked to do that significantly impacts the purpose of teaching and learning right now? Yep, wait time in the virtual environment is really interesting. Yeah, and I will say purpose may be different school to school. Purpose may be different, yeah, district to district. Yeah, and for everything that you're saying about your purpose right now, can you imagine, saying that in February, if you were asked, what's the purpose of, your instruction? I don't think anybody would be giving any of these responses. Yeah. So I'd like you to think about this for just a moment. Some of you have been told that no new learning can take place in the virtual environment. And I think this began when we thought we were out for 2 weeks, and then we thought maybe we're out for 4 weeks. The idea was no new learning. Let's not put that pressure on ourselves or our students. No grading. A lot of people have been told that they can't grade any student work. Some folks are told don't collect any work. We don't want anything coming back into the school, so no collecting any work. A lot of folks have been told just make sure you're reviewing. I think some of you use the word maintain. Just maintain the skills. Just try to, make sure you don't have that summer gap, that summer slump opening up while we're out. However, other folks have been told hold classes at regular times, take attendance. Some folks have been told absolutely you are expected to collect work because you are expected to grade for credit. I have to say, I think that happens a lot more in high school than in the elementary grades, but still some people are very distressed about holding students accountable for quality work for the purpose of giving grades and credit for work done. So there's a spectrum. We're all hearing different things. I will say that I think that the most important thing to remember is that you should be listening to your local administration. You got to do what they're telling you to do locally, and do the best that you can. And we're here to support you no matter what. And I think all of this is going to be evolving. So your entry point for this is wherever you care to enter. So let's talk about our purpose has changed. So let's think about our focus. I've asked you to think about your objectives for the fourth quarter, just the big learning objectives. What are the big things that you wanted students to learn during the fourth quarter? And I emphasize, this is not a list of the texts you are going to teach. This is not a list of the essays you are going to have them write. It's not about the assignments. It's really about those learning objectives that you want to make sure the students nailed at the end of the year. The next question is, what is possible in this environment? If you look at this, it's going to be certainly not more than a handful of objectives for that fourth quarter. What is it possible to do in this particular environment? And in this environment, I mean, certainly the idea that we're not meeting in schools physically face-to-face, but a lot of you mentioned that your number one goal, your primary purpose right now is SEL, making connections, taking care, really caring for the whole student beyond the academics. So what is it possible for us to still achieve academically in that environment? So we consider the context, we consider the tools available. There was a big rush in the first couple of weeks to identify a whole bunch of tools that could suddenly be used in the virtual environment. And that was walked back pretty quickly. If you haven't been using these tools previously, this is probably not the optimal time to do wide-scale learning of brand new tools. That said, it doesn't mean that we can't be learning them while we prepare for whatever the next phase is. And then we want to think about absolutely what is necessary, what is absolutely necessary. And the question is, necessary for what? This is a time to really be thinking about what happens next year. I know I talked to my colleagues in other content areas, and it seems that I think that math and ELA are more concerned about gaps that are opening up from what's going on during this fourth quarter than other content areas. A couple of my colleagues said, yeah, in our content areas, we're used to constantly having gaps. We're always looking at how we're filling in gaps for various reasons. So they seem to be more comfortable with figuring out how to modify curriculum. I think that we're concerned because of how math and ELA are often measured in accountability. My advice is don't worry about that. I think especially at the high school level, we're very concerned about what is necessary in order to give students credits. I heard of one district that immediately said, every student is going to repeat all the classes they're taking in the second semester. And to which you could probably understand that was met with a huge gasp, and they walked that back. They changed their mind on that. And so, to me, that was an acknowledgement of the concern of what is really necessary in order to give credits. I don't think anybody has resolved that quite yet. There may be other requirements that are placed on you locally, and that's something you've got to figure out as far as how to set some priorities, what is absolutely necessary for you to accomplish in this fourth quarter. And the big question then is, what is not possible? You have to know what is an impossible task, what is not going to happen. You need to be able to own that and to be very clear about what is not possible. Because ultimately, we've got to be able to let go. And I know there's a lot of letting go going on right now. How do we let go of our favorite units? How do we let go of the feeling that we have to do this thing? We've been working all year building up to this big project, and I don't see how this project can get done now. How do we let this go? The first thing you do is grieve. You acknowledge that letting go is a grieving process. You find people to commiserate. Join us on Thursday when we have the open office hours. Connect with folks who are going through something similar. Just knowing you're not alone can really help you with that letting go process. Another thing to do is to acknowledge those priorities. Yeah, we're taking care of students in a very different way than we have before. And so that's going to help us, I think, to let go of some of the things that we feel are such an important part of who we are. And remember that we're always doing what is best for students. That's always at the heart of all that we do. So I want to take us back for just a moment to think about the text-dependent questions. Last week, I did this session on text-dependent questions. I've been working on text-dependent question formats and approaches for quite a while. I think it is especially critical right now. I think that this is the best practice to use with students as we're trying to do this distance teaching and learning. So I'd like anyone who was with us or who is familiar with text-dependent questions to enter into the chat box a response to this question. Why is it best for students right now to rely on text-dependent questions? Why is that a best practice for right now? So there are some very important ideas there. We're not having conversations with them, they're having conversations with their text. I think that's what text-dependent questions do. They force the students deeper into the text. And I think you're right. The idea of engaging with these texts asynchronously, this is a change from what we've been doing. We want them to go deep. We're asking them not to just skim across the top. And by focusing on what the text does, what the text says, by focusing on the content of the text, especially since we're not having those live conversations with students so much, it helps level the playing field. So I will tell you, this idea of text-dependent questions is something that's essential to assessment. And when we develop assessment questions, that's one of the parameters that is a non-negotiable, is that the students need to be able to respond to the question with the text that's available to them. That's really important. And that is entirely a matter of equity. Now, of course, yes, it's going to help develop those transfer skills. If we know that they can engage deeply with the text and they know much about how the text works, they can apply that to other situations. So these are all the reasons that I felt last week the first thing we should do is make sure that we get on the same page, that we get familiar with the text-dependent questions approach. Just that one thing, just that narrow. Are my questions text-dependent? Are they relying on the students to engage with the text available to them in order to do this task? And that's the first place to start. So I thank you all for having that conversation in the chat box. So let's talk about text-dependent questions and the really big objectives that we're going to try to meet to the best of our ability. If you've been with me for 5 minutes, then you've heard me state this is my primary objective, that all students should develop evidence-based responses. This is critical. This is what we were getting at with the essay assessments and what we were not seeing. And students are really struggling with evidence-based responses. So if we start with that big objective, let's just focus on this one thing, developing evidence-based responses. We can develop a list of learning intentions relative to that one big objective that could keep us going all year long. So here are some of them. Certainly we want students to be able to analyze text at their appropriate level of complexity. That means on grade level. So we always want them analyzing increasingly complex text. More complex at the end of the year than the beginning of the year, that's one of the key questions. We want them, as they're analyzing this text, to be able to summarize, either a whole or part. Summarizing text, that's a constant question. I think that it is also an assumption. I think that we believe that summarizing is the easiest thing to do. I'm going to tell you it's not. There's a lot of reasons why it's not. We want to make sure that we're asking students to analyze for style, purpose, and effect. This would be author's craft. How does the author do what they're intending to do? Is that the best way to do that? Is that the most effective? We want to make sure that students are recognizing evidence, that they're able to set some kind of a priority, make judgments about best evidence, not best evidence. This is how we're going to have them give evidence-based responses, by really recognizing what's happening in the text that they're reading. It's also important to determine what may be missing or unstated. Well, let me tell you something, if kids go to reading mysteries, then they get much better at realizing what's left out, what's not stated, what's implied, where they really need to extrapolate their information. It also happens in informational text, and I'll tell you it happens a lot in politispeak. So another thing that we want students to be able to do relative to developing evidence-based responses is synthesizing information from multiple texts. I want to be clear, this is true of all grades. In grade 3, the essay construct asks students to look at 2 short passages and respond by drawing evidence from each passage. They had to draw something from both of those short passages. We were expecting students to synthesize at the end of 3rd grade. Now, the 3rd grade text certainly doesn't look like the 8th grade text. The complexity of the text is different, and the complexity of the task, what we're doing, asking students to do to engage. But the big idea, the big objective is the same thing. Synthesize information from multiple texts and provide an evidence-based response. That's a big deal, and students in all grade levels struggle with that. So here again, when you're looking across multiple texts, we might ask students to analyze for purpose, style, effect, the things that make the text different. And it's coming back again to author's craft. We also want to make sure that students can account for conflicting information. Sometimes it's really helpful. For example, last week I used as an example, because it was on PBS the night before, the film about, it's called One Child Nation. Well, if you start exploring that law about one child in China, you can find 3 distinctly different sources of information on the same topic. The law, as it was written, just that legalese translated from the Chinese law. You can find the explanation that was put out by the Chinese government, propaganda for sure, and you can find essays opposing that law by folks who wanted the law repealed. So it's pretty easy to see how you can look across 3 different texts and come up with some conflicting information, ways of flipping data even, so that you're looking at data, the same data, you're looking at it different ways. So these are skills we really want the students to develop. So if we go back for a minute, here are all of these learning intentions relative to this objective. You all do it. You all have been doing it. These are the kinds of things that you do with texts and students all the time. But here's the question. How is this context different from your classroom approach, right? What are you letting it go? What can you not do? So think about that. all of these things that you've been doing, what's different now? Can you name one thing that you're not going, that you're letting go of? And I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to go back and let you look at this screen again for a minute. And as you think about teaching all of these things, and I know you've done all of these things, what are you letting go in this context? What can you not do as far as teaching these learning intentions in this context? Yeah. Time is irrelevant. That's what happens in asynchronous world. Yes, not rushing ahead, Amanda, you're right. Breaking it down and making sure that you're finding firm footing for each one of the learning intentions or the learning goals that you're asking students to accomplish. So step by step, absolutely. Class discussions are absolutely way different. So Natalie, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. Prune the volume of work and make sure that every assignment is absolutely valuable. There's a lot more one-on-one checking in with students. No chance for in-person or small group activities. It's really challenging in this environment. And this is another one of those cases where it's possible to do some of those things, like some live check-in and some small group activities, but you have to have, you really have to have those practices in place before you go into this situation where there's added stress layers. Yeah, it's hard to provide feedback that's immediate, that's just in time. So that's another thing that we've got to get used to. Maybe, I see Gail said less modeling, maybe different modeling. Less, sure, we're talking volume all the way around here. But maybe a different kind of modeling. Oh, thank goodness. Cat was making me too warm. Finally left. Okay. Kim, it may be harder to break down errors, but hopefully we're going to get at some strategies for looking at that a little more closely. So thank you for your responses. I'm going to push on here. So let's talk for a minute just about summarizing, because summarizing is a big, big deal. And so one of the things that happens is between 5th grade and 6th grade, we really switch from, we're progressing from retelling to summarizing objectively. Take yourself out of it and really focus on what's happening in the text. And then we're going to ask students to do that with more and more complex texts. That's hard. It's really hard. And the more challenging the text becomes, the more challenging it is to do a good summary. And I find a lot of students, even on their 11th grade essays, will retell. They're not summarizing. They're not doing what's really at the heart of a summary. They're retelling. And even though I know that many of those students can summarize, when the text is really complex, when the topic is hard, then oftentimes what they do is retell. So let's talk about annotating text. That's one place to start with some summarizing strategies. We can do it in a digital format. Certainly, we've been doing it in paper copy, analog for a long time. Question is, in your Google environment, if you're doing Google Classroom or you're using one of the other platforms, can you color code the text? Can you just highlight in different colors? Sometimes it's easier. And I will tell you, if you read the article, students tend to comprehend what they're reading digitally very well. They tend not to annotate, even though annotation tools are sometimes right there at their fingertips. So annotating in the digital environment may be really helpful. So we want to make sure that they can identify the main topic or the theme. And so here again, this is whether we're talking about literature or not literature. We want to make sure they recognize themes or the big ideas in a story. And details for stories, supporting evidence for a claim. I think I probably should have inverted those. Key vocabulary or terms and phrases. This works whether you're looking at informational text or literary text, right? If there's a particular way that the author is using words, if there are particular words that are critical to the way the story is unfolding or the way the information is unfolding, there's where we get our vocabulary. We also want to pay attention to highly charged language. I find students often miss that, and that's the key to a highly biased kind of text. But we haven't made them extremely sensitive to the highly charged language. And the other thing is, I find students often don't recognize irrelevant or unnecessary information. Now think about this. It could be information that's irrelevant or unnecessary to complete their task. It could also be information that's actually irrelevant or unnecessary in this particular in the particular article or the section that they're reading. The red herrings, if you will. Okay, so if we focus on just getting students to do really good summaries as a first step, okay? We want students to do really good essential summaries as a first step to show us what they know and can do with the text they're reading. Especially, I've seen a lot of assignments that are, sorry, I'm paying attention to too many things at once. So I've seen a lot of assignments that are asking students to have experiences. Go off and explore this and then report back and tell us this. Okay, we're asking students to summarize an experience. We want to focus on the elements of what they have read or viewed, because in this case the text could be a video. And we want to make sure that the feedback that we're giving them focuses back on that text, that source, right? Did you notice that this text did this thing, right? Take them back into it. Ask them to look again. We want to ask questions like, why did the author, why did the author do this thing? We're not assuming that the student, why do you think the author? We're asking, why did the author? And now we're pushing the student back to the author, the purpose, and the effect. Think about focusing on certain words, especially if the student has missed some of the highly charged emotional words. Think about another way of saying that. See these words? What's another way of saying it? What would be the effect? If we said this differently, help the students understand that those highly charged emotional words were intentional. They were carefully selected. That's feedback. That's helpful. That's going to take the students deeper into the text. So here's a strategy that I'm going to share with you. I see someone talked about the text rendering protocol. That's a great protocol. I have a lot of fun with this one. This is also the 5-word summary. So you ask students to choose, excuse me, choose 5 words that represent the text. They don't have to be, that doesn't necessarily mean a 5-word sentence. It's just 5 words that represent the text. Hyphens don't count, by the way. So, 5 words. All right, now you have 5 words that represent the text. You have some idea of why these 5 words represent this text. The big idea is what the text is all about. Then work with 2 partners. Now in a lot of our platforms, we actually can put students together. Like even here in Zoom, down at the bottom of the screen, I think maybe you don't have it, I just do, but there's an option for breakout rooms. I can make breakout rooms. I could put you into different rooms to have a small group conversation. So we ask students to work with 2 partners, share your 5 words, and then agree on just 5 between you. So maybe between the 3 students, they have 12 different words. Okay, you've got to pare that down to 5. What we want them to do then is describe the process of agreeing on those 5 words. So you've had a discussion, you've come to some kind of agreement about why these 5 words are the 5 words that should represent this text. That explanation of how they processed their discussion is key. That is going to be a very valuable learning experience. And then you ask them to write a summary of the text using the 5 words as a guide, right? Okay, you've had this discussion, you have these 5 words. Now I'm going to write a summary, and these 5 words are key. What's the added value? What is the added value of having students think about 5 words as a summary before you have them do the writing? It definitely provides focus. It helps them develop that idea of key topics, key terms. So coming up with 5 words, yeah, I agree, it's not a big deal, but it helps to emphasize that idea that a summary is not a retelling. A summary is not a retelling. A summary is a paring down. How do you pare it down? Oftentimes we'll tell kids, summarize this in 2 sentences, and they'll write the most god-awful sentences, as you know. But if we have them thinking about all the big ideas and limit the number of words, and it's not sentence writing, it's just 5 words. Amanda, I'm glad I hit it. I nailed it right, very timely, right? So what we're trying to do is to get away from the retelling and to get to the summarizing. That is an absolute, that's a first step. If students can stand back and summarize a text, if they can step away from it in order to get the big ideas, they'll be better at synthesizing across different texts. Now, here's something I want you to think about: the importance of looking across multiple texts. Now, sometimes it may be some really complex text. It may be, here, I'm going to introduce them with a simple text. If you're using Newsella, if you're using Smithsonian Tween Tribune, if you're using one of those where you can choose, maybe you choose something at a lower level and then you choose a more complex text, like something from New York Times. By the way, New York Times has just come out with some fabulous educator resources. So you can look across multiple texts in different ways. So certainly, what's the same, what's different? Is the information presented, is it the same information? Is it presented in the same format? Do you see that one is passive where one is very impassioned? Somebody clearly had a strong opinion and used different words to talk about the topic. In this case, when you're looking at a summary of multiple texts, you're synthesizing information and you're really reflecting, you're going to find out from the student more than just their knowledge, their bare comprehension. They're really going to be revealing to you how much they understand about the way that information is presented. And we also want to make sure that a summary reflects the best evidence for their purpose. So here's something I want to show you. I know a lot of you are being told not to grade, and that's okay. Not grading is okay. But we want to be able to give students quality feedback, even if we're just looking at maintaining, even if we're looking at this is nothing new, we're just trying to make sure that they're maintaining their skills until the next time we come together again. Here's a way of doing this. This is from Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey. It's a format that they use in their schools. So we have 3 columns. The middle column is the success criteria. Now I know a lot of you are used to using rubrics, but here's the difference. Instead of a scoring rubric, instead of, you know, this is partial, this is kinda, this is okay, this is better, instead of a rubric, we're looking specifically at the criteria. And my suggestion would be, go look at your rubric, take the top, take the best score, the best thing that the students can do. Put that in this middle column for success criteria, just that. Then on the left-hand side, we're looking for commenting on what would make that better. Whatever your students have given you, yes, I'm just going to say, yes, all the slides, everything's available. Yep, it's all there. So the left-hand side is where you give students feedback about what would make it better. The right-hand side is where you can give feedback if it's really outstanding, if it's excellent. And the middle is where you can talk about, yes, there it is. That's just exactly what's there. Here's the weird thing, though. This, I think it's kind of weird. I've been asked to help teachers understand how to develop practices that let students judge for themselves. We're not giving them grades, so we want them to be able to give their own feedback. Well, take a look at this. This is a little more up close, right? This is that first one. So we're looking at how students understand the big ideas, okay? So students can reflect on something maybe they could do to make it better, or if they're particularly proud, they think they've done it exceptionally well, they can explain that as well. Here's the next one. Here's another way that even with the summary, before we get to the summary writing, before we get too far into the big essay writing, we can see if the students have interpreted the text appropriately. Coming back to, once again, looking at the author's craft. Now, the document that I showed you had, I think, 5, 6, 5. You don't have to use all of those. You can do it one at a time. Give them one thing to do at a time, or give them a few. I don't know if I'd give them all 5 at once. But think about this. I'm going to take us back to, here's our learning intentions with our big objective. This is the objective that could drive for the year. Here are all the learning intentions that we keep coming back to. Here are some possible prompts. Now, again, this is taking students back to the text. Right? Michelle is saying this type of an approach worked really well with her students. It helps break it down. It helps you to break down your pieces. This may be where you're going, but instead of a rubric that's walking you up there, you have your success criteria and that reflection for amending on the way until you can get to, you know that the students are ready to write something that is more, excuse me, in depth. So think about this. If we're narrowing, as we've said we need to, if we're reducing volumes and we're trying to focus in on some real essential learning, what are we letting go? How are we focusing? What else could we possibly do? Okay, we're going to pare it down, break it down, go step by step. We're going to let go of our rubrics. We're going to focus on success criteria. We're going to look for ways for students to talk to themselves, with their text, to each other, looking for lots of ways to get meaningful feedback in small bites. I think in the classroom, when we're having constant discussions, we make a lot of assumptions about what's going on. In this environment, our assumptions are blown up. Yes, Linda, I agree. We're really focusing on the evidence piece of it. That's what's critical. I want to be sensitive to time. I'd like you to continue the metacognition as a theme for the year. I agree. I don't know what grade you teach, Natalie, but metacognition is always a great theme, an underpinning to do in there. I want to talk about where we go, how we proceed, and why I've taken the approach I have. I think in the beginning, a lot of people were looking for the how, like, give me something that will help me to do this. Just curate all of these different tools. And I didn't think that was the right approach to take. I think the first thing is we need to be very clear as English teachers about what we want to teach and what we want to assess. We've got to do the what first. What is it we want students to learn? And how are we going to know that they've learned it? We need to make sure that we know why this is important. Why is this the thing that we want to make sure the students, why are we making this a priority? I want to make sure that we're looking at the tools that we're currently using, tools that we're already using. I like us to reflect on the tools that are exclusive to the context. So in other words, are there tools that we're using that we can only be using in the classroom and we're feeling really frustrated right now because we've been using this all year long and now we can't? Or are there tools that are exclusive to virtual that we're trying to learn right now, which is really frustrating because we weren't using them all year long? And can we start exploring maybe the tools that help us and our students move between the two, between the live classroom and the virtual classroom? That's where I think we need to be moving toward. Regardless of how long our current situation lasts, I think we need to get nimble at moving between the two. That's my own crystal ball, by the way. So here's a few things I just want to make sure that you're paying attention to. The Fordham Institute has produced, I think, an excellent resource with lots of things that you can pick up and use. I think I mentioned before, the Cult of Pedagogy's recording, you know, can't think of the word for it, but it's great. This discussion about how we approach distance learning. It's really helpful. It's a 1-hour recording. I want to make sure you're aware Kylene Beers is holding daily office hours with authors. And that's really interesting. It's a discussion with authors about how you might be teaching their works in this environment. And Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle are essentially having daily office hours as well. And their discussions are amusing as well as enlightening. So they're doing it daily as long as they're closed. So I've put some, I do not want to do that. So I have put some, there we go. Hopefully you can still see this. I've put some resources in there for you. So here's what I want to make sure that you know. This, shoot.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Today is Tuesday, April 7th. This is our 17th conversation. Good morning, Penny.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
All right, that's not where I intended to go, but okay. So I wanted to, but I do want to show you one more thing. well, let me go here. If you go to the Padlet that I showed you before, come on. Here's what you'll find. So last week you'll find here the slides for last week with the Zoom recording embedded in that. You have to open it up to find it. Here's the teacher clarity and feedback for today. Here's, I did want to show you this, I got to keep it simple, just a Word, a document that you can download. And then I put a couple other resources in there. By the way, if you complete this form, you'll at the end make sure you say yes to the last question, and it'll give you your contact hour for this time. So I want to make sure that you are paying attention to that particular item. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Excellent. All right. And I'm going to open up the conversation for feedback, for questions, reflections. What's going on? Yes, the Padlet link there. Absolutely, that is what I was attempting to do when I accidentally opened Kelly and Penny. So after today's session, when the recording is ready, I will do the same thing. I will embed it in the slide deck for today so that I'd say by tomorrow you can access it there. Oh, good. All right. All right, I'm just gonna hang out here, open it up for free-form conversation. If not, then I hope to see you all on Thursday for the office hours when we talk together again. Bye, everyone. I love seeing how the squares all move around.
Morgan, had you previously, this is John, had you previously sent us a link to the feedback for today that we do when we're finished?
No.
I just wondered if it was the same each time, like
No.
a standard form.
It's a standard form. It's going to look familiar, but I was told that we should be recreating it each week. So yeah, it's a different link.
Okay.
Yeah, just because we're collecting the data from it, so we're trying to keep it all separate for each event.
And is that link something you emailed to us already, or?
No. But I did put it in the slide, so give me just a second and I'll post it again.
Great.
Put it up here.
That's the link right there. I took it from the slides and already put it in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. See,
Thanks,
Tiff's
Tiff.
a good partner. She's back in
Thank you,
there.
Tiff.